I think another important thing which most researchers also miss is their ability to tell stories. I could actually talk about the newsletter. Newsletter has been like a very rewarding experience. I think I've blurred the line between my work and life, right? Some people might not necessarily like it, but I love it. That is when I started realizing, okay, every number in fintech has a story behind it, right? And the customer actually sort of had tears in his eyes, right? This man must be like around 50 years old. He said that he had actually pawned his wife's jewelry for his daughter's marriage.
Hey everyone, welcome to Product Stories, the podcast that delves into the minds of product and design folks to talk about their stories, challenges, and work. My name is Kaushik, and in each episode, I talk to my guests about how they work, the process they follow, new tools, and the breakthroughs they have had in their career. This week, our guest is Dharmesh. He's one of the leading user research experts in India. He was previously working as the head of research at Setu. Before that, he also worked in various fintech companies like ClearTax and Rupeek. We talk a bit about what is the scenario of user research and what are the opportunities that are there in the market today. We also talk about how you can convince leadership into spending more budget or allocating more resources to research. At the same time, we also talk about some of his latest projects that he's been working on. This was a fun yet insightful episode. I really hope you enjoy this episode as well. I had a wonderful time talking to Dharmesh. Hey Dharmesh, super happy to have you here. I remember when I first sort of started this podcast, you were one of the guests I really wanted to bring on the show because at that point of time, my knowledge about research was very limited, and I could not think of a better person who I could like have a conversation and learn about it from. But I'm so happy that you are here finally, and we are able to do this. Um, I'm sure you kind of don't need an intro, but I would really love it if you would speak a few words about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Kaushik, first of all. I think we've been going back and forth for this almost a year, I guess.
Yeah.
Finally, we found a time. I thought it's high time that, we should actually do this podcast. Um, Let me give you a short introduction about myself. My name is Dharmesh Ba. I was born and brought up in Tamil Nadu. The larger part of my earlier childhood were from Tamil Nadu. I did my uh, engineering from Vellore Institute of Technology, post which I had an opportunity to go and do Masters in Design from National Institute of Design in Gandhinagar, Gujarat. And post that, I've been working predominantly with startups. It's been a 8-year journey. Even though the number seems very large for a lot of Gen Zs today, but I think I still feel that my journey is just getting started. I see it as uh, a 30-year long journey. So for me, I still feel I'm in like the early stages of my design career. For the first half of my design career, for the first 4 years, I was a designer, product designer. I worked with different fintech startups. Started my journey with this company called Rupeek, which is into gold loan lending. Post which I moved to ClearTax, which is an online tax filing platform. And very recently, my last stint was with this fintech API company called Setu, which is where I actually shifted towards research. From then on, it's been just getting into full time research itself has been like a 4 year journey. I've been doing predominantly user research, and within that, I'm more excited about uncovering like the consumer behavior around like the emergent economy, which is what typically the startup folks call the Bharat. Yeah, so that's the space that I'm interested in. That's a short introduction about myself.
Awesome. So I have like a bunch of questions ready to ask, like ready to shoot right at you. But like before sort of I go there, I kind of want to talk about this one interesting thing which I noticed, right? Which is you're
Mhm.
predominantly worked in fintech companies, and you take like large interest in whether it is consumer spending behavior or what sort of infrastructure is there, etc., all these things, like all the user behaviors and stuff. So where does this interest for fintech sort of come from? Because I have my own story where I love fintech and why I'm obsessed with fintech products, but I really want to like sort of know what your story is also.
I think it started from a very personal exploration. I remember during 2015, during my first job before Rupeek, I had a short stint with another food tech startup. I used to get money, and the money that I was getting was huge enough at that time for a kid who had just graduated out of college. What I realized is I couldn't save anything, right? After a few months, I started feeling that, if this money is with me, I'm going to spend it all by myself. I started fearing it, and I would send a huge chunk of my money just to my mom, uh, just to keep that away from my eyesight, right? And then I would try to sort of manage my money with what I had. This started making me uncomfortable. The idea of not being able to manage money started making me very uncomfortable. That's when I got into my own journey of managing personal finances, right? So I think that time when I moved to Rupeek, where I was working as a product designer, I think my personal interest and what the company wanted started slowly aligning towards each other, right? So I started trying to put my story in the products that I was building, or I was trying to see the world of money from that lens and try and understand how people look at money, right? And there was one vivid incident I remember, which I think was slightly a turning point. I don't want to make it very dramatic, but I definitely do remember when I look back this 8 year journey. Right. So when I was working at Rupeek, um, Rupeek had this product called gold loan shifting, right? So which means you could shift your gold loan from one of the existing players to Rupeek, and you could actually save interest rates. So for that, what you need to do is a customer needs to come to Rupee. They need to sort of declare how much gold they've pawned, how much gold jewelry they've pawned, and a Rupee executive will go along with the customer, go to their existing lender, take the gold, and they will have to, and the Rupee executive will have to check the authenticity of the gold right outside the existing lender. So Rupee will pay the money for their existing lender, and we will take the gold. We'll have to check the authenticity of the gold, and then we will move it to our locker. So all of this happens in like a premise just outside, like whatever lenders offices, right? So it used to be like a very like a thrilling moment. Like I went to the field visit, and I have done a couple of these where I have accompanied the customers to shift their gold loan from the other organizations to Rupee, right? So it was a very tense moment, and I was feeling very anxious because there are multiple things. You shouldn't miss out a gold jewelry, and even a simple things miscalculation will result in huge loss, right? It's a highly anxious sort of situation when you're shifting this gold jewelry. And I was thinking that, is it worth it? Is it worth doing this? Why am I so anxious and stuff? So when we had actually sort of we got the gold out, and when we showed it to the customer, and the customer actually sort of had tears in his eyes, right? This man must be like around 50 years old. He said that he had actually pawned his wife's jewelry for his daughter's marriage, and he had assumed that he could sort of take the jewelry back in few months, but it has been almost a year and he couldn't sort of take it. And he somehow had given hope of the jewelry, and I think now when this Rupee had come and promised him that he can pay lesser interest rate, the first time when he saw this jewelry after like a year, he almost had tears, right? And that's when I started realizing that what finance is generally looked upon as numbers has a lot of interesting narratives behind it, right? From an Excel sheet perspective, all we see is, okay, this customer, how much jewelry he has, and what is the amount of the jewelry cost, how much interest he needs to pay. That's the one row in an Excel sheet, right? Or even you can take it in UI terms, it's a card. But there is a narrative behind it, there's a story behind it, and there is a lot of emotions behind it, right? So that is when I started realizing, okay, every number in fintech has a story behind it, right? So that's the perspective shift for me that happened during 2016, is to look at finances not as a bunch of numbers, as a bunch of stories, right? So then you look at stock markets, even you look at some companies balance sheet, each number is a story, right? Each for every number, to let's say somebody's profit increases from, let's say, 200 crores to 300 crores, there's a story behind it. There should be a bunch of people who would have come together, made some changes in the company, some effort needs to would have gone, so that the number is actually sort of increasing, right? or if you look at even like a gold loan ko balance sheet, you will see that somebody who has like a really high interest rate, which is almost equivalent to the amount of the gold itself, there must be a very, I wouldn't call it sad story, but just but an unfortunate story that has resulted in that number, right? So for me, fintech journey started from there, where I started looking numbers as not just numbers, and then there are narratives behind it.
Interesting. Is that also probably like the phase where you started getting involved more in research, or like did it like spark interest for research?
Yeah, research interest sparked even back in the college. We had this course called ethnography, where we had to go and interview different groups of people. We had to choose our own set of group of people, and we had to sort of interview and write some reports around it. It was a completely, again, very uncomfortable process. I Because I was in Ahmedabad and I didn't know Gujarati, I had to choose a Tamil speaking location, an area in Ahmedabad, and then there was a temple, and then there was like three pujaris who knew Tamil. So I had to go there. I didn't know the temple. I had no idea. Somebody told me this. I directly walked into the space, and then I told them about it. So it's that research expands over weeks, right? I'll have to go back to that place again and again for like say 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It was a very uncomfortable process, confronting with someone, talking to someone, and getting to know them. All of it was very challenging, but it was also a rewarding experience to know new sets of people whom otherwise I would have not gotten the chance to speak with, right? So I've gone to temples before and I've seen pujaris, or at the max the interaction would be is like, I'll put some dakshina in the plate, and he will give me like vibhuti, or he will give me kumkum, right? That's the maximum interaction. I never thought about, do these people have a life beyond? I know they have a life beyond, but what does it look like, right? So when I interacted with them, then I realized that they are they were very young boys, and they had gone to gurukul and they had come back, and they were still learning in their job, and it's almost like how we go to a college and we learn all the, they also have like their own metaphors, and they have their own vocabulary, and they have their own worldview, how they look at things and stuff, right? So my research journey picked up from there. I would say my lot of my interest came from during the projects during my college, but I think I had some knack for it even during my job. But it was very accidental in 2019 where I moved to a full time research job. I was not necessarily looking forward to do it. It's a bunch of things that came together. That's something that I didn't expect it to happen, and hence I moved to research.
Understood. I mean, I really like sort of like the aspect where you talk about like, behind every finance number there is a story. Um, I mean that sort of brings in like a lot of perspective um, when you're thinking about financial products. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean that's wonderful. So far, I've actually been sort of asking like these questions that I've sort of been curious about since I started following your journey. um but
Sure.
like now I do have like a bunch of more questions which like I sort of want to throw at you and like see like what kind of answers come out. So
Yeah, sure.
one of the first things like I kind of want to talk about, especially in this market condition also, where especially when there's a downturn, economic downturn, the first um, the first thing like any company looks at axing is like all these new initiatives, or like a lot of these research initiatives as well, right? So based on that, so I kind of want to understand like what are like sort of the opportunities that exist today for like UX researchers, like in India, like specifically talking about in India, what sort of opportunities are there, and like where do you think the future is heading?
I think the future is extremely bright, and I had come up with this framework where during 2015, when I had just graduated, uh, the phase of where we had to create every interface element to put together like a web page or a mobile app. I call this phase a very creation phase, right? So this was even before Sketch was popular. We had to sort of use Photoshop and Illustrator to string things together. Like if you remember, that was the time where there was no ready-made components and stuff, and still skeuomorphic was still like a cool thing for designers to play around. Now, from then on came a great interesting phase where there was a rise of Sketch, then there was a rise of Figma, and then there was HD. All of them, what they gave rise to, and to give credits, material design played a huge role also in it, to say that there's a lot of standardization that came into pictures, right? So now, which meant we moved to a phase where I call the design ka phase, which is called the the uh, I would say it is the composition phase, right? So composition phase is essentially a phase where the elements largely exist. There is some miniature modifications that you're probably doing on it, and then you're putting them together, right? So you're good in certain, you don't necessarily need to create it from scratch. You can still sort of be a designer if you know how to do good compositions, right? Now that's the phase we are in. I think now we are transitioning into another phase which I call like the phase of choosing, right? A phase of choosing is where you give a prompt to an AI, and AI is able to sort of design or develop a bunch of interfaces, and it's able to put it together. The only thing you need to do is give it as richer context as possible, right? Now here on, you just need a great eye for detail to pick the right one. Then you'll be able to sort of pick these interfaces and string them together, right? Now, why I'm saying talking about this is, now on one side this is happening for like the design industry. A similar parallel track is also happening for the engineering side or the coding industry, right? So we have the rise of no code tools, and now there is copilots. And then if you have copilots with design and engineer, the the difficulty to build a product reduces drastically, right? And that is why the moment you have open APIs, open AI's APIs being like, given access to the world, people have been able to put together very interesting products that were not possible in the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years over a week, just a weekend, correct? Now, which means it is not your ability to build the product right is important. It is your ability to build the right product, right? So which means that you need to build the right product for the right set of customers, and for there you need to, the only way to do it is bottoms up, where you need to try and understand consumers in a much more deeper fashion, and that is where research will help. Correct. So research will help you build products bottoms up by having deeper conversations with them, understanding their worldview, their life in a slightly more larger context, and then if you have the ability to sort of extract information and then convert them into insights to building and inserting them into building these products. Now I'm seeing another pattern that's also sort of emerging. I still need more data, but I'll still go ahead and say this. When I speak to founders who are younger, so here in the younger, let's say consider less than 25 years old, right? For them, the ability to strike a conversation with a stranger, which is not transactional, is is slightly fearful. Like they fear having conversations which is non-transactional with a stranger, right? What I mean by that is, on a daily life basis we do talk to people who who are probably not necessarily from our circle, right? You would have interactions with your kirana store owner, you would have interactions with your the Uber driver that you take, or like the Swiggy delivery person, but everything is transactional. You ask a question and they're going to tell you an answer, but we don't have open-ended conversations like how you would sort of have with your friends and family, correct? So for them it's a completely fearful act to have the conversation. I also feel this is largely coming from the environment in which they've grown up, right? So let's say, imagine you have had access to YouTube, Swiggy, Zomato, Amazon, everything from you, let's say your high school, which means in your life everything is tracked, right? If I have a doubt, I can immediately go to internet, Wikipedia, I get the information. Or if I have to sort of navigate to a new place, I can use Google Maps. If I have to sort of order something in Amazon, everything you can track. The idea of uncertainty does not necessarily exist for in the world of digital. There are only very few places like uncertainty still exists. One is in career, and another is in relationship, and that's what people struggle with even today. Right? It's very difficult to predict them. On unless and other than this, other aspects, most of the time it's just figured out, right? So when you're doing research, there's a lot of uncertainty involved, right? I can't directly go and ask an insight from a person. I need to sort of derive data, and from there, I need to derive like the insights. It's a two-step process. There's a lot of uncertainty that is involved in it. Dealing with that uncertainty for younger founders, at least in my observation, it seems a little difficult. Building that itself as a competency will also help a lot of young researchers to position themselves better in the coming years.
Interesting. So, like, also, I'm like part of that generation which you were describing. um, uh, so one of the questions which, like, I sort of had in mind is like, um, a lot of times research is something that gets ignored by, like, say, a company's leadership, right? Research is usually like almost takes a setback or like last priority. um how do you sort of like in the past, how have you sort of like convince like leadership to probably like invest more resources into research? At the same time, how do you think this will change in the future, right? Like, as you mentioned that there's such a huge role that research is going to play in every single company. How is this sort of going to change?
Yeah, so I've thought about this problem deeper, right? My mom runs a small business based out of Europe where she sells like these puja items, correct? Let's consider that as a business, or let's even consider that as a startup. I don't think my mom would ever need like anything equivalent to, let's say, something called research. Forget having a UX researcher, right? Anything equivalent to called research, because she has her foot on the ground day in and day out. She sees customers, she speaks to them, and she sort of like understands their worldview and where they come from and what are the sort of challenges in their life and all of that. And that's the same with all the small businesses, correct? Now you go to a kirana store guy or even like a gold jeweler. Like I was recently writing this article about gold jewelers, and I was doing some research around it. Like one jewelry shop owner was talking about the same. Every time when like a customer comes, and it's usually generational. For example, when they come for Mangal Sutru and all of it, we talk to them about how their life went and what is happening in their life, and it's slightly more relationship based rather than being transactional, right? So now this jeweler understands this one family, the context in where they come from, where do they exist, and what's their life story. If not to a great extent, to an extent, at least he can show some sort of uh, care to them. Correct. Now the challenge comes in when the startup sort of when a startup expands and there is a bunch of hierarchies that are set in, right? The one good cue to sort of understand when you should sort of insert research is when your key stakeholders and your end consumers, how many levels of loopholes you need to jump, and how many levels you need to jump for them to sort of get to the consumer, right? Let's say, for example, if who's actually in touch with, let's say, the consumer. Let's say if there is a customer care executive, and for customer care executive might have his own manager, and uska manager will have another manager. So how many levels are there between the key decision makers and consumers is a very important metric how I look at it, right? So the the bigger the gap between like the consumers and the key decision makers, the higher is the need for a researcher to exist, or for the need for them to understand the consumers. Now the thing is, it's every product manager, head of product, or founders, they do want to solve consumer problems, right? It's even if like a researcher, I'm also wanting to sort of solve consumer problems. As a stakeholders, they also want to solve. The intent exists, right? Now the question is, are researchers able to position themselves as people who can actually solve their problem, is actually the question. I feel that the need exists, because if I'm like a founder, initially I might throw my darts in the dark and see if it is solving a problem, right? The more misses that I face, and the expensive my mistakes get, and that is when they will start realizing, okay, I need a more systematic manner to sort of understand users, correct? So they do definitely have the need. But the question is, are researchers able to position themselves in a manner who can also speak their language in helping them understand consumers better? Does it answer your question?
Yeah, to a great extent, like when you sort of put it across that way, I think it sort of really helps, like a team which is like making all these decisions about how to allocate resources to make the right decision, because this gives them, like context about it. A lot of the times what happens is, like um, the way they sort of pursue the whole activity to what actually is happening, sometimes there's a large gap between like understanding also. So that also sort of plays a role.
Yeah, yeah.
So moving on, like one of the questions sort of which I wanted to ask you is like, what kind of process do you follow when you go about a research, right? I'm sure, like with each problem statement there is, like a different method and everything. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to, like look for like a brief answer for someone who's probably, like getting started in research, like they probably just want to understand, okay, what does a UX researcher do in a day, or like what does their week look like? So something on those lines.
Yeah, sure. I am predominantly a qualitative researcher. So let me introduce like this framework that I sort of use it to evaluate what is the kind of work that I'm doing. So largely the kind of questions that most stakeholders deal with are there of two types, right? One, it can be a question of how many, or it can be a question of why. So when you take a question of how many, for example, a question can be how many users visited my site, how many people subscribed to my product, how many people actually dropped off after onboarding. So it all deals with numbers. I'm looking for some sort of number, right? So it's quantitative in nature. So if I trying to answer a question which is why did people drop off after onboarding, or why are people not purchasing my product? So that becomes more qualitative. In a qualitative research, you are expecting more narratives and more stories to come out of like the as a research activity, and there are some themes that will give you patterns based on like the conversations that you have with users. So I am predominantly a qualitative researcher. Now, within the kind of qualitative research that we do, there are broadly two sets. One is where you have when you do research with an artifact, and then there is a research which you do without an artifact. Uh, Here, artifact by mean it could be any sort of like say digital interfaces in my context. It could be an app, it could be a website, or it could be a smartwatch. It could even be like the digital home devices that we're talking about. A product that is already built, and I am more interested in understanding the interaction between the product and the consumer, right? Now when I talk about without an artifact, which means a product does not exist or the feature does not exist and are yet to be built, and I want to understand themes and stories from like my target segment so that I could build a more desirable product. So this is like the broad classification of the kind of work that we sort of do. On a daily basis, where does most of my time go? Most of my time goes in research operations, which means trying to find the right set of people for recruitment and sort of vetting them across, conducting these interviews, transcribing them, like highlighting important anecdotes. So majority of the time, like 80% of the time, uh, goes in one area. That's why I had recently also put up a tweet saying research is largely a very boring, monotonous job, right? The analysis piece, which is very exciting for almost all the stakeholders, is largely only 20% of it, correct? And if you want to do an exceptional analysis and if you want to derive themes, you need to keep yourself updated, not with the research knowledge, but knowledge everything around it. I need to understand a little bit of politics, I need to understand a little bit of economics, I need to understand a little bit of marketing, everything, so that your themes that you derive are more contextual, right? Now, I'll be extremely sad if I do an analysis and, like, say, if Kaushik does an analysis and we come up with the same set of themes, or if you come up with the same set of like report, that's a little bad. So there needs to be some perspective in research when you're sort of presenting your findings to your stakeholders. And if your findings don't have like a life or a soul, then it falls flat, right? I think if your findings are merely about, okay, these three people said this, these four people said this is what has happened, I think it's better, we could leave that job to an AI. It'll do it far better than us. Now I need to bring some perspective to research, and every day everything that I do is only to sort of build that perspective, make those insights much more richer, right? And that's why writing newsletters, doing like the research other than like the commercial projects that I take up, it all helps, right? So at some point in time, I think I've blurred the line between my work and life, right? Some people might not necessarily like it, but I love it, right? For me, everything that I observe around me is giving me something curious to think about.
So it's almost like research for you is the way you like go about your everyday rather than like a part of your
Yeah,
day.
yeah. You could say that.
Great. Um, okay, like continuing on, like since you mentioned like a couple of your projects that you have been like working on, since like you have transitioned from Setu, um, I would love to talk about like a couple of them, um, but I would also like it like if you would decide which one you would like to talk about more, because because from where I am, all the projects that you have worked on, like Thousand Faces, your newsletter, all of them are like super interesting for me. So, which one would you like to start?
I could actually talk about the newsletter. Newsletter has been like a very rewarding experience, both in terms of internal learning and also in terms of like external validation, where with the kind of people that I've gotten introduced to um, because of the content that I put out is unimaginable. It's not even something that I would have thought about, right? But the fact that like it's a simple newsletter, it's a bunch of text. It's not like I discovered like a I did a science experiment and I discovered something. It's just a bunch of text that is put together. But the amount of wonders it does when somebody reads, and the amount of love that are being showered, right? For even simple text like this, it's unbelievable, right? I've heard people say that it it makes them understand me as a person a little better. Yeah, so those are newsletters. Definitely a very rewarding has been a very rewarding experience among all the stuff that I've done post Setu.
Yeah, to also like sort of add upon like whatever you mentioned, uh, I think like I've come up. I mean, like I'm obsessed with like any fintech or like finance related like material in general. I think a few years back, if I'm not wrong, you used to run this newsletter as an initiative in Setu.
Yeah.
I'm sort of not able to recollect the name, but you used to run uh, this particular initiative, and that was probably one of the best things I've come across because that always sort of changed my perspective about who users are in India,
Hmm.
rather than like having like a typical tier one city user. It broadened my perspective is what I would say. At the same time, like now what you are doing with India Notes as well, right? These are like some of these topics are topics that you go about every day, but you don't like think about it, or like dwell deeper into. I think that's something you do fantastically. um like I'm gonna attach the newsletter link in the description. Like if anyone's interested, they should definitely check it out. um yeah, I think sorry to like sort of like drift apart, but I think I
No
really
worries.
wanted to mention that and like plug it in.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, so what do you want to know about the
Do
newsletter?
you
I mean,
probably
if you
want
want
to
something
talk a
specific.
bit about I'm so sorry I cut you off.
No, no, no. I was just trying to ask. Is there any aspect of newsletter that we should talk?
Yeah, I think we can talk a bunch of things, like, sort of how you go about doing it, like where did, like, sort of the idea for this come up from, and how has, like, sort of the whole journey been like I'm sure, like you mentioned about how rewarding the entire process is, but uh sort of like the initial stages, I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, so why I started actually writing the newsletter was that I wanted to break myself away from like the comfort shell of fintech. I wanted to look research beyond fintech, um, because fintech is good. It's interesting. I still love fintech deeply, but the thing is, I don't want to sort of be restricted to a certain topic. I'm already restricting myself to like a domain like research, right? I've stopped doing like UI UX, traditional product design. I've stopped doing that. Now I don't want to even within that restrict myself to a certain domain. uh, Fintech is interesting for the fact that it cuts across every other domain also, right? So for example, even when you talk about health, there is an aspect of finance in it. When you talk about education, there's an aspect of finance in it. You talk about e-commerce, there is an aspect of finance in it. So it cuts across most of the other sectors or topics that we understand. But I also wanted to explore other sets of consumer behavior, and that's where I started writing about it a little bit here and there on the India Notes. I think in from last October is when we have been consistently writing every week, most of the time. Now, when I started, one thing I wanted to do was, there has been some interesting observations in my mind, and there's been some interesting questions that I've always had. I wanted to just put it out and see what the reaction is, right? So one of the initial newsletters that I wrote was this idea of, why don't we have collective user accounts in Indian apps, right? It stems from this behavior, or behavior observation is, in India, at least like for a long time, the bank accounts were not necessarily with it's not individual bank accounts, it's mostly family account, right? Let's say you live in like a nuclear family where the dad sort of controls most predominantly the expenses, right? If anything important, like it could be wallet with money or debit card or credit card, whatever, it was the man of the family who was controlling it. Now, even if you sort of go for like um, a purchase, even when I was young, when I used to go for a purchase, like me and my mom would shop, and it would be my dad who will actually would pay the money, correct? Now, shopping in that way is a very collective experience. It's not an independent individual sort of an experience, especially in households. Even today, predominantly it could be either mom or like the dad who will sort of control like the money inside a family, right? Now, if that is the case, why do we still stick with individual accounts in our system architecture? Now it works beautifully for West, because West is a very individualistic society, but in India is still largely a collective society. Even in a collective society, why are we force-fitting this idea of individualistic sort of an accounts? And when I start thinking about it from that lens, lot of apps could have that, and which still doesn't make sense. Like a very evident one is something like Amazon, where you could have a family purchase, or even something like grocery. So in multiple researches I've done, it's actually the husband and wife both who are sort of coming together to plan like their weekly grocery, right? So for example, in many cases, in one of the recent research also, I talked to a couple, and they said they both have a same big basket account. Whenever something is over, they all like the husband would also add it in the cart, and the wife would also add it in the cart. At the end of the week, they check out, but it's a single account, right? Now, even in my family, me and my wife, we share like the Swiggy one sort of an account, right? So these are simple examples, right? And I'll tell you some more exciting examples that comes. Let's take an example like matrimonial, right? In a matrimonial, this is not like Tinder where you swipe, right? So it's a completely different process. So if you're going into this entire arranged marriage sort of process, so the father will also look at the girls in the one account, like the son will also look at, and like the uncle will also have a say in, like what are the girl that they want to sort of like scout for the boy, right? And yet something like a Bharat Matrimonial or like Shadi.com, they don't have like this accounts that you can tie into a single thing, correct? So and you can't even take like two subscription, it doesn't make sense, right? So these are some of the questions. This is a question that I've been having for a long time. So what I did is I started writing about it, and I had actually made like some simple quick mock-ups, and I had actually put it up just for to see how what is kind of the response, right? So a lot of the curiosity that I had, things that I've been suggesting to a lot of founders and like other stakeholders, but most of them have been shot down in many cases because of the feasibility, because of there's a lot of challenges in it, right? Why should I do it differently, and what are the repercussions that come with it? Nobody knows, right? So, but as a concept, I can still talk about it. I can put it out. Some of these concepts were ideas which what was initially documented in the newsletter, and as I moved forward, then I started discovering new reports. I started discovering new apps which had taken very unconventional design approach, right? So I've written extensively about this app called Friend, or an app like Animal, where I realized these apps don't look anything close to the like the Western apps that I used to sort of refer. Like it could be Airbnb, Uber, or Amazon, or Google, or any of these, right? So these are the apps that usually designers refer to get inspiration. And when I look at the apps like Animal, Friend, or Sri Mandir, they are completely different, and it's nothing close to what you would have seen in the West. And I thought these are apps that are not yet celebrated enough in the product and design community, is what I felt. And I wanted to bring some of those aspects and nuances out there, because I'm never going to sort of download Srimandir by myself and explore, because it's not a use case for me, right? It might not be use case for many designers also, but some of the interesting design decisions that have been taken, I thought everybody should read about it, learn about it. Of course, there could be some inspiration that could be drawn into exporting some of those design decisions to your own context, right? So now the newsletter predominant goal is to bring out these ideas, bring out these stories for a larger community to read and understand. And it's very bottoms up sort of approach, like the Bharat first sort of approach is what we have taken.
Interesting. Yeah, like as I mentioned, like it's a wonderful newsletter. I think like everyone who's probably listened to this episode should really check it out. It's like filled with insights and something that you'd personally enjoy reading. Um, but like sort of like moving on to your like one of your other project, which is Thousand Faces Club. Uh, how did that idea sort of like start off? I think that was you started that first before India Notes, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure about the timelines, but I remember something on those lines. And like how did that start? Where did this idea sort of strike you? How did you sort of go about it?
Yeah. So India Notes, so Thousand Faces Club, sorry. So Thousand Faces Club was not my personal project as such, but it was done for a friend's company called Philo. So Akhil, who's the founder of Philo, and we worked previously in Setu, and he was a big fan of D91 Labs. He started this company called Philo PHYLLO, which is into creator. It was an API company in the creator economy space, right? So Setu was a API company in the fintech space, and we developed D91 Labs as a research wing. So Akhil's point was, hey, can you develop like a D91 Labs but for creator economy, right? And that's the problem statement that was given to me. I thought it was exciting enough, a completely new sort of challenge for me to pick up, and that's how I started building Thousand Faces Club. So I was there around for almost a year to kickstart like a lot of these initiatives, even within Thousand Faces Club. What are the different kind of series, podcasts that we could sort of do? It was a very exciting journey, and starting from the name and like the logo, branding, everything, I had sort of helped them orchestrate. So even though I started it as like D91 Labs for creator economy, but it had its own set of challenges, right? Because the target audience were completely different in this case, and I had to sort of reinvent a lot of things for creator economy and Thousand Faces Club. But yeah, but it's been like a very exciting journey. I also got to learn a lot about it, a lot about like the creator economy. and it gave me this another opportunity to move away from fintech and do something different, right? So it goes back to the same thing. Anytime I get too comfortable with something, I try to see if I can move away from it and do something else. Otherwise, it makes me slightly restless.
And I think like creator economy is also like a very, very fun topic to explore. Again, like, sort of that correlation of finance comes in there as well. But more than that, right? More than that, like how sort of solopreneurs or small group of people started creating content and everything. It's really amazing, and it's a very fun topic. And again, it's a topic that's close to me as well. That's why, I used
Yeah,
to sort of regularly follow um, whatever that was being put out by Thousand Places.
yeah.
Great. So, sort of like one question that I have like always imagined, like I don't necessarily have an answer for it, but I was hoping you would, which is like, if today um I'm getting started as a designer, and probably research is something that sparks my interest. How do I go about, sort of like creating a career out of it, right? I think for like product design, there's like well laid out path with by multiple design schools, cohort courses, etc., etc. But like I don't see a lot of that for research. So what are your thoughts on this?
I only have a long answer. I actually don't have a short answer, right? One, you need to sort of train a lot of your senses, right? It could be you need to tune your hearing ability. Or when I say hearing, it's not how much you can hear. I mean, how much you can listen is more important, right? Um, when everybody is focusing on what they said, you should be smart enough to sort of gauge what they haven't said, right? So you need to also tune your eyes for it, right? So even when I do like this UX audit, when I give it to somebody else, um, what they see it in surface, you need, if you are a UX researcher, you should be able to see it two levels more deeper, right? So it's your ability to tune your senses into seeing something in a slightly different perspective than what a common man would see. That is the first sort of spark, I guess, right? So for example, like I remember in one of these interviews, uh, like Maniratnam was asked, what how did you get interest in movies, right? um, like he said something very simple, right? He said that I didn't have many metrics probably to gauge when I was interested in movies. I watched movies just like an audience who was sitting next to me in the theater, right? All that was exciting for me is that I went one level deeper and tried to understand what was someone thinking while making the scene, or how did they come about making the scene. Could be a simple shot, or it could be like a sort of like a romantic scene between like the protagonists and all of it, right? So I started thinking about how did this scene come into picture, right? Whereas the person sitting next to me was completely consumed into the story. Something around this lines is what he said. That is what I feel. That's a simple definition I would like to adopt. Correct. So everybody is sort of using apps. You're also using apps, but unless if you're not going one level deeper and trying to understand why is this color chosen, why is this composition chosen, and what is it doing inside your mind? Do you think it's intentional or do you think it's accidental? All of that, like coming these things together, is what will spark curiosity. Are you curious enough? If you're not curious enough, I think you should. It's very difficult to be a researcher, right? If you're not inherently curious about why certain things happen, or if you're not that childlike curiosity, if you're not able to retain, it becomes very challenging to sort of do the research. Because like I said, if you want to sort of go on ground and go to a village and speak a language or try to communicate with someone in a language that you don't understand, It's a very uncomfortable sort of process. Unless you have that curiosity, you won't walk that path. Correct. And that is why I feel that that is more important. Because in, like, I've spoken to a lot of recent young researchers, they're very happy about sitting and doing online research, right? Or they are more comfortable when somebody actually does the participant recruitment for them, gives an Excel sheet and gives them like a Zoom link. All they have to do is click on the Zoom link and ask some question, and when the data comes in, they will sort of analyze and do some present. That is not the that is not the whole point of research, right? And if you're boiling it down to just talking to people and say highlighting something and making presentations, again, easily you will be replaced. I go back to the same thing again and again, right? Whenever an idea comes, earlier I used to think about like this: whenever an idea comes to my mind, the first sort of um, thing that comes to my mind is, okay, I have idea A. If let's say somebody else is thinking about the same problem statement, is do will they also get the same idea A? If the likeliness of it is higher, then I will actually skip that idea and I'll try to see what else can I think about. This used to be my yardstick when I think about solutions. Now my yardstick has moved to AI, saying that okay, if I come up with a solution, if I think that most likely AI will give a same solution, or most likely AI can do this, why should I do it? I need to do something else, right? So similarly in research also, you need to sort of have a perspective in like the insights that you do. You need to have curiosity into it. If these two are not there, then it becomes extremely challenging, right? Even if you ask me materials around where should I start reading for let's say research and stuff, I would say start with a lot of daily observations only, right? Rather than sitting and reading books over books over books, it'll tell you methods, right? It'll tell you how to keep your cameras on, how to be in the right lighting. It'll tell you how to sort of check for your mic and all of that. But that's not going to help you, right? So what I would sort of recommend is look for anything and everything around you, read anything and everything around you, right? So then you will start developing some originality or some personality for yourself.
Yeah, I kind of like really like your answer because like you you did not focus on saying like, hey, this is how you become a user researcher or this is what a user researcher is. But I think you really clarified this aspect, which is like what a user researcher is not, or like, what are like some of
Yeah,
the aspects that are like tough about research, and those are the things that you should be looking forward to, like,
yeah,
enjoy or accept as a challenge, or like, however you want to look at it.
yeah,
Great. So I we have actually sort of like reached the end of the episode. I mean, I've had like a wonderful time talking to you about everything. But like usually I end my episodes with like, a bunch of rapid fire questions, sort of like to put you on the spot and like, ask you shoot these questions at you. But before that,
yeah, sure.
is there anything that you would like to add? Is there anything that you would like to talk about apart from all the things that we have spoken about?
um no, I think we covered most of the interesting sort of aspect, right? I think another important thing which most researchers also miss is their ability to tell stories, right? And that also again comes from developing a perspective for yourself and developing like a personality, a really strong personality for yourself, right? um, Now researchers by themselves, yeah, they do research and they sort of come up with the insights, but they predominantly influencers within the organization. You should have the ability to sort of influence the different stakeholders to push them in thinking in a slightly different manner, and that's the only sole job. Correct. Everybody's thinking about a problem statement in a certain manner. Hey, here is my data. It is going to make you push into thinking into slightly different. You can go back to building the same solution, but at least now you're aware that there is another perspective to it. Correct. Now which means your way of how you're taking these insights inside the internally to the stakeholders, they need to change. We can't have 200-page reports in the age of TikTok. Who's going to read that? I still feel like a lot of agencies still deliver this 150-page reports and 200-page reports, which I don't think anybody reads it other than the this person who designs it and other than the person who presents it. Correct. So we need to come up with this new formats of delivering research, which will sort of influence your internal stakeholders in different manner. And you also need to develop like a great command over like how you present, and also the storytelling aspect of it. Right. Only a bunch of these things, when they come together, it will make your work a lot more powerful, right? And that is why every time when I write tweet threads or every time I write newsletter, it helps me communicate a, a very complex idea in simpler terms. And I think that's a challenge, and I'd like to take the challenge up again and again and again, right? Can I communicate something extremely complex and challenging in simpler terms for somebody to sort of understand? Correct. So this aspect around influencing storytelling, coming up with new formats, I think researchers are still pretty old school that way, right? At least the ones that I've seen. It is still a lot of presentation. Why can't you create like this TikTok type videos and just deliver it in Slack to different stakeholders? Correct. Or now we have so many interesting tools like say Descript, and why can't we use that to sort of make these quick videos and sort of send it? Why can't you have a newsletter within your organization which just talks about research? Why should every time a research should derive from a problem statement? Your consumer is still consumer, correct? And the kind of, you, if you want to sort of understand it, why can't you have a set of research insights which are just broad level, which will continuously be given to different stakeholders, right? You don't need every, if you're starting to work like, let's say, TCS or CTS internally, where you say I'll get a problem statement, then I'll go work on it, I'll come back and give the results, and then I'll pick up, it becomes so monotonous, it becomes so boring. Make at least your life very exciting within the organizations that you work, right? So I think that aspect of it, I still haven't seen like a lot of innovation. Like on the parallel in design, we've seen from Sketch evolve to Figma, and Figma may, it came to community, it came to plugins, and a lot of these aspects came, right? What is the equivalent of it in research? And that is what I've been trying to do in terms of these stories. What I'm essentially doing is the equivalent of like trying to do like the equivalent of Figma community, where you say, okay, when Kauji creates a file, I will take it and I will act on top of that, right? And I'll modify it into a different thing, right? That's what I'm also trying to do it in terms of stories. If I put up a gig economy story, I want more people to sort of take it, work on it, or edit it, use it in their product. I'm happy whenever they sort of use it. Correct. And I think it works. What I seen the impact of repeatedly putting these stories, right? I think the greatest impact was when these founders of this company, Gullak, when they had their pitch deck. I think one slide was from like one of the data that we had put out in D91 Labs, right? So they had pulled out some data from that, and that was a part of the pitch deck. And I thought that was a very impactful moment for me, right? Then every effort that I put in, it I felt like it was worth it, because somebody was able to inspire, and when they're starting a company, they're able to extract some insights out of it and make it as a part of their pitch presentation, right? So yeah, I think that kind of innovation, process innovation, distribution innovation, needs to come in user research is what I feel.
Yeah, I think especially the storytelling part, I think it sort of like there's a lot of importance for it in design in general as well. Like as a product designer, when you work on a problem statement, uh, you can like sort of like come up with the solution and everything, but the way you put across the solution, like whether it is for stakeholders or whether like it can be something as simple as like you're presenting your case study in an interview. I think the whole aspect of storytelling plays such a huge role there, because it's
Yeah.
all about convincing like how you're solving for a particular problem, right? And I think that's something a lot of people generally tend to skip because they believe it's not really necessary, but I've seen like what a huge role it plays, like in every step of the way. um yeah, I sort of also wish like a lot more people would take it more seriously, in research as well as in product design.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true, right? Again, going back to the same point, right? If the data and analysis is commoditized like with AI, your perspective, and that's again goes back to your storytelling, is what will make you very unique.
Yeah, totally. Great. Do we jump into our questions?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Um, Great. So I have a few fun questions for you.
Hmm.
So the first question. So if you had to take all the listeners of this this episode, this podcast, to three of your favorite South Indian places, like restaurants, which ones would they be?
One, I've been recently sort of visiting a lot of this restaurant called Namma SLN, which is in Jayanagar. That's one place I would definitely take them to. Another is definitely Sindhu Coffee. Um, but right now, these days, I prefer drinking only coffee and tea there. Otherwise, the food probably is not as great as it used to be. What is the other restaurant? Hmm, Bangalore Cafe. Bangalore Cafe is
Hmm.
again in Jayanagar. That's a great place for me to
You
sort
mean
of
you mean
take them to.
Bengaluru Cafe, right?
It's called Bangalore Cafe. Yeah, it's in Jayanagar. Yeah,
Yeah,
second floor.
because there are like two of them in the
Yeah, yeah,
same
yeah.
proximity, where one is
Oh,
called
yeah.
Bangalore
Yeah. So
Cafe and the
this,
other one is called Bengaluru Cafe.
I think this is the Bangalore Cafe where you have a little open space and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've been to that place. It's amazing. Great choices. I sort of wanted to touch upon the foodie aspects of you in the episode. I figured this could be a great place. But yeah,
Yeah.
moving on to next question. Um, this is more on the lines of like one piece of advice that you would give your younger self.
Um, I mean, don't. The one thing that I would sort of tell my younger self is that don't think much about what other people would think or say what they feel and all aspects of it. It's difficult to satisfy everyone. Uh, just this fear itself has made me not take certain risks that I should have taken uh, in terms of life, in terms of relationships, or in terms of money, whatever it is, right? It's very difficult even for me. Forget your younger self. I need to tell my current self also, right? From time to time that it's not possible to sort of satisfy everyone, and people have like slightly more shorter term memory as compared to what we think about it, right? For example, if I make a mistake, for example, if I stammer in this podcast, as a listener for you on YouTube, you wouldn't even notice it. But since I stammered, that particular instance is repeated in my mind multiple times, and every time I'm thinking about it, it sort of expands in its intensity, right? At some point in time, you start feeling that, okay, this is the biggest mistake I ever done in my life, sort of a thing. So I think trying to move away from it and not take yourself too seriously is also very important, right? I think some of these aspects I'm still working on it. So I wouldn't say younger self, even for my current self, it's the same advice.
Yeah. So like you sort of write these bunch of Twitter threads, sometimes it's based on a story, sometimes it's based on your past experience, and usually they have such like snippets where it might be like advice or it might be like learnings. So on sort of on the same lens, what would be a piece of advice you would give people today who's like young professionals who are like getting into job, probably, or like 1 year into job. So what would your advice to them be?
I don't know if I'm like experienced enough to sort of give advices and all, right? People will figure out their own path, right? One thing is to sort of be very careful is because the access to advisors has become so easy. You open Twitter or you open Instagram, everybody is sort of giving some or the other. what works for them does not necessarily have to work for me, right? So today, let's say I have an idea. Most likely, if I make like a nice pitch presentation, I can still go ahead and sort of raise money and have this tag like a running $1 million company, right? It's not that the fact that people won't admire it. Okay, you some people will sort of send me WhatsApp messages, so I'm very proud of you. My mother will be very happy. She'll send this whatever money control article probably to all her relatives and stuff like that. But what do I want? Am I ready to take that path? Am I ready to take all those stress? I don't think so. Correct. And also, now you've been around in like for at least 2 3 years, correct? I've been here around for 7 years. The kind of companies that we celebrated in 2015, half of them don't exist in 2020. Now, the companies that we are celebrating right now in 2020 will not exist in, like, say, in 2025, right? Somehow, we've created ourselves into a both physical and digital echo chambers, right? And we feel that there are certain metrics that we need to sort of achieve, not because you want it. That's because other people told you that this is the right metric to achieve. It could be raising funds or getting that CDO title, or even sort of like starting to sort of post threads on Twitter, whatever it is. Correct. So this is called a mimetic desire, which is essentially your ability to mimic desires that has been set as a standard in society, and we're trying to sort of follow it, right? To move away from it and sort of do a self reflection and figure out the path for yourself is very challenging, and I think that is what we should do. So the advice is to don't follow advice.
Great. At least I'm gonna take your advice, although it goes against what you're saying. But yeah, I would still want to take that. Um, yeah. Last but one question. If you had to, like, sort of like describe your entire journey in just one single word, how would you do it?
My past journey.
Yeah.
Are you asking me past journey?
Yeah. I mean, like past, current, everything that comes.
Um, I actually, it's very difficult to sort of say it in just one word. So every time I think about life journey, the only picture that comes to my mind is me traveling in like uh, a, a train on an infinite path, where I am sitting by like a window, um, and and as a passerby, I'm just looking around. Right. Sometimes I'm looking inside the train. Sometimes I'm looking outside the train, without knowing when my stop would come. Right. So this is a very very philosophical thought that I've been having. Right. Life is like a train on an infinite journey. Right. Some people get on one stop, some people get on a different stop, and you enter the train, and you need to sort of get down at somewhere, and you don't know when the stop is. So it's just going to be boring. So people sort of set rules among themselves and play games and all of that, just to keep themselves entertained, right? So, and I feel that's the thing, right? Your marriage, studying, like, job, money aspect, all of it is just an entertainment to keep ourselves occupied till we die. So eventually life is like a journey towards death, right? So some people will prefer some entertainment, some people will prefer some other entertainment. Sometimes it's not to be a part of that circus. Also, you can just sit in the train and just see what is happening outside, correct? So for me, the metaphor for life is always this, goes back to the train journey. Yeah, so that's a train journey is what I would say.
Okay. Amazing. Cool. Last question. Um, what's next for Dharmesh?
I actually don't know. I actually don't know. So I like you to keep it that way. I've done too much planning past. None of it has worked out. So I stopped planning much.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. I'll respect your answer. But it's been wonderful having you here, like, just talking to you. All the insights that you shared, all I mean, everything the way you put across, I really had fun, like, just talking to you, and I'm so glad we could like finally do this.
Yeah,
I have nothing but like, thankful that you decided to like, join me for this episode. Thank you so much.
thanks,
It's
Kaushik.
been a wonderful past 1 hour.
Yeah, same here. I didn't even realize it's been an hour. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Product Stories for more such episodes.